All right.
Here we are.
Here we are.
We've been talking about it.
We've been talking about this. This is the Three Musketeers Health Podcast, where we're helping you be your own empowered health detective. So excited to be here.
Yeah.
My name is Eric Shadd. I'm the founder of Thrivality and chief detective, functional health detective in my practice, helping people solve, chronic and complex health challenges. And then joining me with some of my very good friends to my right, Dr. Brett Fuller and Bill Reddy. So why don't you guys do a quick introduction? And
Sure.
You first.
Thank you. So, I graduated from chiropractic school a few years ago, 40, and then went into acupuncture and lots of functional nutrition, biofeedback, and now joined by my wife in practice. She's a functional medicine integrative practitioner. So we do a lot of different things and have just come to realize that, health comes from within in each of us, really, and it's not as simple as taking a pill. I mean, that's kind of the... And in discovering what each person needs takes time, right?
Amen.
Bill, when did I meet you?
More than 20 years ago.
Has it been, you guys have known each other that long?
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
When
But
we first
recently we've gotten to know each other a lot better, and we all, we're looking at trying to practice together, but haven't got that done yet, but maybe we will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm Bill Reddy. I'm the owner and operator of Vital Point Acupuncture, and I'm a board certified licensed acupuncturist in Annandale, Virginia.
Awesome. Well, it's interesting when you think about serendipity and how I got to meet Brett and his wife, Agent.
Oh, yeah.
And I think this is a good story to kind of share. It gives you a little bit of color of how we all know each other. So in 2019, my wife and I went to a retreat with Ben Greenfield in Switzerland at the Swiss Mountain Clinic. And one of the women at the retreat talked about this device called the Hocket, which is basically a shell type device that you get in, and it has ozone, PMF, frequencies, steam, microcurrent, stuff like that. And so I was really curious about it, and so I began to research, where there would be a place nearby where I could go to try it. And here, Brett and his wife Hadrian had one at their practice. Right. And so I went and did a series, 5 to 10 sessions, and thanks to my wife's keen cooking skills, I started to bring, cookies or muffins or, and so between my charm and her cooking, we've become friends. We've actually traveled together, and then when I was talking to Brett about a place to call home as far as a physical practice, he mentioned coming. So Bill and I are in the same building here in Annandale. We share this office here, and just having a heck of a time. So that's how we all know each other.
And Bill, you've been an instructor, you were just telling me, right?
Yes.
At different places, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got a vast experience. You're a writer. You've published lots.
I do write.
And, we really think a lot of you. That's why we're here, right?
Very kind. I appreciate
it. So Bill, you've published extensively, right? How many different journals have you written, just off the top of your head, roughly?
6 or 8.
6 or 8 journals that you've... Total article count is roughly...
more... between 150 and 200.
Yeah. So well published, yeah.
So I think what we did all here is we realized that we wanted to share some of our experiences, some of our wisdom, if you will, over time, and kind of identify to help the listener maybe figure out some things for themselves, right? So what would you say? How do you identify health? What does that mean?
Well, before we go there, I want to just build on what you said there. I think part of the reason why I want to do this podcast is, I was a patient first, right? So, 20 years ago, 20 years ago, I had an unfortunate reinfection, of a dental situation, and took a lot of antibiotics. And when I got through that, I just could not get my moxie back, right? And so that began my journey of trying to, rebuild my health. And I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but in recent years, we've seen a proliferation of podcasts and material out there. And I think when I talk to, my clients as an FDN and work with them, I think one of the things that I hear often is it's just overwhelming the amount of information that's out there. Right. And so I've spent the better part of 20 years, figuring out what worked for me and consulting with people like you and Bill and, and so I think part of my passion for doing this podcast was to try and, separate the signal from the noise for people from the overwhelming amount of information that is out there via, YouTube and the various podcasts. What about you? What?
So I think you, when I listened to you speak, what was going through my mind is that it's sometimes unclear. I mean, very unclear what you were just saying, separating the noise.
Mm-hmm.
What direction do I go? And how do I,
Yeah, because there's not always one way. That's what's hard. That's what makes clinical practice hard.
There's always more than one
Yeah.
way to get to Rome, right?
However, in the U.S., they kind of give you one pointer and one way, which is, well, actually two. They give you drugs and surgery, right? So, you have two options,
Yeah.
but there's so many more options out there. And health promotion and disease prevention is really the key to proper health. And yet, how many of us are really taught that?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there certainly is the time for surgery, and there certainly is the time for certain medications, but that's not health. Health is not, as you just said, not taking a pill.
Right. If you're stressed out, it doesn't mean that you've got an SSRI deficiency. Exactly. And so it's all how you look at it.
Yeah. But I think to your point, even within the functional health space, there's not necessarily one right path for there's definitely not one right path for everybody. That's the nuance.
And that's why you need a coach.
Yeah.
Right? To help you make those decisions.
Yeah.
Because there's a plethora of things you could do.
Right. So we want to try and separate some of the signal from the noise, give people, I think, options and maybe some tools, right? Some mental frameworks to think about, okay, I've got 3 options in front of me. Which one do I pick and how do I measure my progress and my success?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So maybe we could segue then to your question, which is, what is health? You've been doing this for 40 years. How would you define it?
Well, it's never one aspect, right? When we were speaking here earlier, we talked about structural energy and chemical inputs. I always look at it as there's something sometimes you need to take away. There's something sometimes you need to put in, and put them in at the right balance, whether it be water or vitamin C.
Yeah, so hierarchy and order does matter. Sometimes
Yes.
you're detoxifying.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're fasting. Sometimes you're
Well,
taking in nutrition. Yeah.
sure. And then combining that with some, mental health. We often forget mental health.
Spiritual health.
Spiritual health. Right.
Yeah.
So,
What about you?
Well, I think if you're looking at just purely the organism, it's sleep, digestion, and elimination are my 3 things that if someone comes in with shoulder pain and I fix their shoulder, I did not do my job. Because if they're not sleeping well, if they're not digesting well, then they're not getting all the nutrients from their food. And then elimination, if they're not detoxifying themselves. And the standard American diet, which is sad, doesn't have enough fiber in it. And so that's what really binds to our junk, the toxins in our body, and gets it out. So
exactly.
that's key.
Mm-hmm. And we face the challenges with food in that what's not in there. Minerals, right? There's not the content.
Enough nutrients and vitamins. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which is why we oftentimes get into supplementation.
Yeah.
Trying to make up that gap.
Certainly.
Well, let me take a shot at this. So, I came back. So you guys know I did a dry fasting retreat last late March and April. So this is March, April of 2024.
And explain to the audience what a dry fast
Yeah.
is.
So dry fasting is basically where you abstain from all food and water, which was quite a challenge. And I did it for 9 days over in Montenegro with a Russian doctor, Dr. Filanov, and his team. it was an amazing experience. I learned a lot about it. I learned that the body, can can adapt to, this huge stress of dry fasting. It wasn't easy, Towards the end of the retreat, you don't sleep a lot because your body's basically it's using a lot of cortisol to stimulate glucogenesis, and so you sleep maybe 2 hours a night, but you feel okay. But anyway, so I came back from that, right? And what I saw from my other fellow fasters is if they didn't get better, they were looking to do more dry fasting, because dry fasting sort of became the end game, right? It became the thing that people were after. And I said, well, wait a minute. I think everybody at some point needs to kind of pull up and reassess and think about what is health in the first place. Where am I relative to that ideal, right? And what's the appropriate tool to kind of get back to where I want? And dry fasting is a tool. It's that's what was my conclusion, and not the end game. So I came up with this definition.
And just to be clear, not necessarily a tool for everyone.
Right. No, definitely not. Yeah, because if someone is got poor adrenal health, doing a dry fast would probably be contraindicated, right? Because you're going to need those adrenal glands to draw on, right? There is actually someone in my cohort of dry fasters. There's several people that are still really struggling and stuck, and I suspect that there was probably either some too much mitochondrial or adrenal dysfunction where the fasting becomes too much of a stressor. So anyways, so that led me to write this article about what is health anyways. And so I thought this would be maybe a good place for us to kind of start and elaborate on. But I came up with this notion of health is the harmonious interaction of hormones, immune system, digestion, detoxification, energy production, and the nervous system, right? And then you can certainly fold in things like, having a good, healthy community and a spiritual connection, such that, right, I can sleep well, I have good energy, and a sense of connection, to things beyond myself. That would be my definition, rough definition.
But locally in the DC area, stress is huge, and stress is not just if your boss is difficult or the drive. It can be you have an infection, or you're exposed to mold, or you have something chronic going on, and then that really chips away at the foundation of your health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I've heard someone say this to me before. It isn't just stress; it's your reaction to stress.
Right, your capacity.
Because stress isn't always. In fact, without stress, I probably wouldn't get up in the morning and go to work.
Right.
So you do need stress is a good thing. If the iceberg's moving, I've heard this analogy too. You can try to stop the iceberg, or you can move with the flow.
Yes, great analogy.
And all of what you said, the word that was going through my mind, of course, is homeostasis, right?
Yeah.
We hear that word, but it's homeostasis in all things. And we just made a nice long list of all those things.
And so getting back to homeostasis and the balance and harmony in Chinese medicine is, if at work things are getting a little bit heavier than what you can deal with, and then you don't sleep well, and then you've just been eating through 7-Eleven or anything, and then you start showing symptoms, right? And then you're this far out of balance, and then to try to get you back into balance, that's what we do, but from different aspects.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what would you guys add or edit to that list? Like, I know one of the things that you've talked about, when someone walks into your practice and they don't have a spiritual connection or a sense of, as you said, community, and we were kind of prepping for this. Elaborate further on that. Like, what have you...
Well, like if I'm working with them, I also do neurofeedback, right? And so that's stress, anxiety, depression, all of that, and trying to achieve balance in the brain. I find that if I'm working with them, sometimes it's helpful if they have an anchor in you always return religiosity, and it doesn't matter what that means. I mean, that could be anything, any named religion or not. To give them that anchor is something, and maybe that all generates. I was at a conference one time in Colorado, and this gentleman is speaking in front of all these 150 doctors, and he goes, "What's the answer?" And he hugged the guy.
Oh, amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. Love, really.
Yeah.
I mean, not to be too corny, but having a
important.
base of that, right, in all different forms, It's vital, I think.
Yeah.
It's vital to the life experience and the healing process.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, AIHM, the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, that's their center point. That's
Is
they
it?
say that love is the center point.
Love is
Healing.
the answer?
Yeah, so for being a bunch of physicians, it's pretty surprising.
Yeah, it came out of nowhere for me, yeah. So that was good.
Could you elaborate a little bit on what you meant by religiosity?
Certainly. So religiosity there's been studies just on how in first world countries there tends to be there tends to be less interest in formalized religion, and that in countries like the Philippines, etc., it tends to be more. And part of it is because it gives people hope. And another aspect of it, of course, is just having a sense of community in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really important.
Hope, community, purpose. Yeah.
Spiritual connection. Yeah.
And also volunteerism. That's one of the huge things in the science of happiness, is that they found that if you just volunteer in some or any way, that you tend to be happier than those who do not. So.
Yeah, you're giving back, right?
Yeah.
And
which is why you guys, and myself,
that's exactly what I was going to say.
why we find we're happy.
Yeah.
I mean, I would
Yes.
generally say we're happy guys.
Yeah, I think I get this huge like high, when I've had a material impact in a positive way on somebody's life.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that to me is just like they walk out of here and I'm just like, wow, I get to do this, and so I think having that in our lives, that sense of wonderment and helping other people, or having community or a sense of connection is so critically important to overall health.
Yes.
Which segues to meaning and purpose in our lives, and how lack of that, especially with the pandemic and people being trapped in their homes, and then others who are retired and they just feel lonely.
Yes.
And
Yeah, I have seen this. My mom has been retired some years now, and she's really great at staying active and has a rich community of friends that come over and they do a book review, and I think that really helps her stay sharp and mentally and spiritually, emotionally, alert and flexible. So
Good.
So that's a great definition of health, right? We've talked a lot about the spiritual connection. Is there anything else along the hormones, the immune, digestion, detox, energy production, or nervous system that you want to
Well, I think we
highlight?
I think we'll delve into those things
Yeah, as we go.
along. I think today maybe we're more generalized
Okay.
in those statements. Does that make sense?
we just miss cognition. That there seems to be a real spike in not only depression and anxiety, but also just Alzheimer's and other types of neurodegenerative disorders. Have you noticed that in your practice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking of one right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of us, or a lot of listeners, want to know what can we do to maintain our health. And he's a biohacker and deals with just that, is just trying to optimize brain power.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm sort of surprised. I will do. I've done a series of light and sound events at a local spa, and I've met age anywhere from 25 to 65, and stress is like one of the common themes that people talk about, and that certainly relates to cognition. I was sort of surprised when I had a couple, 30-something, women come in and they both raised their hand about sleep, and I was sort of surprised if they, someone at 30 would have sleep issues. So yeah, it all ties together. Well, maybe this is a good segue to talk about what are some of the common contributors of what I call metabolic chaos that leads to disruptions in sleep or cognition, or a sense of community.
That's a big can of worms. You've got we don't sleep with the sun. We're up at nights on our devices. We all know that. There's frequency in lighting. There's that. There's being in a car and traveling. There's that. Not getting exercise. I mean, this is a long list.
Yeah, it is a long list.
Not being hydrated. I mean, it's all the things that we deal with. When we're talking with folks.
Yeah, pesticides, herbicides,
Yep.
fungicides, all the
Toxicity,
things that we're exposed to on a regular basis.
Which, as a kid, growing up on a farm, I put my hands right in the pesticide and herbicide.
Yeah, it's amazing you're still
And-
upright.
Well, I mean,
You
not
got
to
a
be
lot of
morbid,
work.
but my father died. He had a kidney that grew to the size of a football coming out the front of his body because of toxicity, right? I mean,
Yikes.
we literally, I mean, it was just crazy, just putting your hands right in it, breathing it in. You know, had I known that, obviously I would have led my life differently. But, you know, I've tried to do a lot of things, you know, eating cleaner foods, you know, trying to do foods that aren't inflammatory. And there's testing we can get into that stuff later, but you know, doing the saunas, doing IVs, those kind of things, the ozone IV, which helps clean up that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think you have to do this every day. I mean, we all kind of smile when somebody comes in and says, "Why are you here?" Well, I want to detoxify. Well, you better be doing that every day.
Yeah, in our
In
environment.
today's,
Right.
I don't know if you guys remember that chart, and it showed the toxicity from the 1920s, and it kind of goes like this, you know, and now it's just
It's everywhere.
You go outside, you breathe in aluminum from jet fuel.
Yeah, you know, one of the surprising things some years ago, I did, oops, somehow the camera pivoted off. Brett, you were so entertaining it just to pivot it to you.
Phil, you gotta be more animated.
Yeah, I'll be waving.
Well, I've got it, you know, I've got, yeah. So anyways, I did a test some years ago, and, you know, this is well into my biohacking health enthusiast, you know, journey. So I've already done a ton of detox. And, you know, I remember getting a test back for some sort of environmental, which measured MBTE, which is a common gasoline additive, and it was sky high. And I was sort of surprised by that given all that I had done. But then I think about the environment, you know, we live just outside of the DC Beltway. Like, we literally are within a half a mile of the main artery that runs through and around the DC area, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, and then on top of that, we live, you know, there's a major 4-lane highway at the top of our neighborhood, you know, so.
It's just spewing.
It's spewing, yeah.
I was in Shenandoah hiking, and the air was so clean. And it wasn't until I came back to the city that I noticed that there's this underlying diesel smell here that we completely tune out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Until,
Well,
you know.
yeah.
Yeah. Whenever I go to my hometown up in upstate New York, I'm always struck by how quieter it is. You know, I'll get up at my mom's and walk outside in the yard and a cup of coffee, and it's like, oh, I forgot all the background noise I deal with
Sure.
every day in the big city in
We
DC.
desensitized for sure.
Yeah.
To all that stuff.
Yeah.
Light pollution,
Yeah.
noise pollution,
Yes.
etc.
Yeah. So
People pollution.
people pollution, yeah, toxic energy, right? Toxic energy can be
That's another
a
side.
huge.
Your relationships and how toxic they
Yeah.
are, and what are that doing to your health in the long run, and that's a deep one.
Yeah, it's a deep one. Yeah, toxic people, toxic relationships can be a total.
Well, we
Brain and
definitely have a
body
lot
and-
of subjects to talk about.
Yeah.
We're not going to run out,
No, definitely not.
for sure.
Yeah. So on my list, I think of contributors to metabolic chaos, in addition to what you guys have said, certainly in the environment, right? So, you know, light pollution, sound pollution, or certainly the environmental factors, you know, like gasoline additives, rubber tires, pesticides, herbicides. I mean, most of the clients that I come in and I do some sort of evaluation with, like almost universally, everybody, when I do an energetic test for, like, say, glyphosate, everybody goes weak on that. Just about everybody. So it is pretty much, you know, endemic. That's a herbicide that's used very common in agriculture. So
I know it firsthand.
yeah,
Atrazine.
yeah. Atrazine is another one that RFK Jr. has, I think, brought more to the fore about, you know, its role in potentially disrupting hormones. So yeah. So there's so much to talk about, but those are some of the contributors. So environmental, it's like air, lighting, sound, herbicides, pesticides,
Right. And
heavy metals.
you know, as you come in as a practitioner, right, you kind of assess, well, here's my primary tool. You might use your primary tool, but then, wow, you really, there's some things here that we could really key on for you.
Right.
That set up an order of hierarchy. You know, if
Right.
someone's breaking down and they can't sit up straight because they're just emotionally distraught, obviously you're going to deal with that first, whether you want to or not.
Yeah.
They need to, for sure.
And then you look at endocrine disruptors, which are so out of control these days that in 1980, mid-1980s, a healthy 20-year-old man has twice the sperm count that there is today in a 20-year-old.
Wow.
It's cut in half in what,
That's quite a
40
stat.
years? Yeah, it really is. And so the scientists don't know entirely what's contributing to it, but the endocrine disruption is a big one. And also in 1980, there might be a single fertility clinic in an entire metropolitan area. Here in DC or the area in a 5-mile radius, there's more than 15 fertility centers. So
Because it's now such an issue.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember being at work.
Cancer,
Yeah, cancer.
infertility, right?
It's all signs that our environment is in really.
Yeah, autoimmune disorders off
Oh.
the charts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so those are some of the contributors, right? Just the toxins in our environment. The other one would be Lyme, mold. We see that a lot in our practices.
Either voluntary or involuntary, we put toxins in our body.
Yeah.
And we can discuss that at
Yeah.
length altogether.
Cool. Well, I think just to wrap things up for today, this is our first, podcast. And the reason, again, why we wanted to do this podcast is there's just, an overwhelming amount of information out there. And I think it lacks context, right? And so part of our mission was to kind of help distill that information down, but also to put it in a way that people could be their own health detective, right? That they could have some tools and some best practices.
The beginning of understanding,
Yeah.
the problem, beginning of understanding the contributing factors that you may or may not have thought of, and then actions that you might be able to take.
Right.
And I think if we can do that for people, it'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah. Any concluding thoughts on your side?
Well, physicians will say, oh, you've got primary hypertension or you have secondary hypertension. But, hypertension is not a disease, it's a symptom. And so if you don't look at what the root cause of the symptom is, then you're really missing the boat. And unfortunately, physicians are taught this.
Which is why we're here, because instead of treating the symptom, we want to get to the root cause.
Root cause, yeah. And helping people find the right order, right? So if someone comes in and they have a Lyme infection, you don't necessarily treat the Lyme infection right away, even though that's people want to get after it, right? You might have to open the detox pathways, or
If the house is burning down, you try to put some of the fires out first.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, folks. Well, this is the Three Musketeers Health Podcast signing off for today. But our mission is to help you be your own empowered health detective. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with the next podcast.
Look forward to it.
All right.
Cheerio.
That was good.